Good night, everybody. I just went ahead and decided I'm going to do this miscellaneous video now that I talked about in my recent community post. So I titled it, What's It Gonna Take? Because what is it going to take for people to understand the real perils, the real dangers we all face, and from whom it's coming from? And of course, I'm talking about the CCP regime. People still don't understand that at the end of the day, more people are going to fall at the hands of this wicked regime than by all other forms of death combined. Yes, what's going to happen here is the enormity of the impact of what's going to happen here is such that it's going to scare the rest of the world because they're going to bear witness to what will happen to this country. This country will be reduced to absolute ruination, destruction, decimation, and annihilation. And its people will have all been destroyed or enslaved, just like portrayed in all my work. I portray my work for a reason. No, my work isn't to, scare anybody or none of that. It's just to convey simple reality. It's to convey simple reality. We have a lot of people in this country. We live in a very war-naive country. So when it strikes, and it will, our people are not going to be ready whatsoever at all for the torrent of, the great red wave that's going to sweep this place up. It's a very, very real threat. The real danger doesn't come from these uber-rich Western elite punks who don't have any power really to enforce their will. I mean, what do they have? They have these little puny woke militaries. They don't have any. They're increasingly depleted, by the way. They don't have anything formidable. They don't have no way to enforce their will. But China does. China has 1.5 billion people, and the demographics of military-aged males, just not even the females, just the males, is over 350 million military-aged males. Of course, other demographics include, school-aged and middle-aged and elderly, but of the military-aged population, the males alone are over 350 million. That means that they have a military-aged male population that is bigger than our entire country's population. Then if you throw in the military-aged females just to boot, there's another 30 million or so. It's not as much as the men, but it's still, if you combine them, it's almost 700,000 when you put it together, that are military-aged people in China, men and women. So those demographics alone, they basically combined are over 2 times what our national population would be. And our population is just they're not ready at all for what's going to come upon them. I can tell you that. All the work on this channel has been done to get people ready for what the hell is coming here. Okay? It's very serious. It's very dire. No, I'm not trying to frighten anybody. I'm trying to get people ready to cope with the realities that are going to come upon this place. I mean, we're talking about a nation with 1.5 billion people and 40% of the entire world's industrial base. Do you understand what that means? China has the biggest industrial base of any nation on Earth, and even without converting all of it to war production, which they're actually retooled to be able to do in an instant due to their civil military fusion policy, yes, all shipyards of China and even bus and automotive factories and other factories can easily be retooled because they're set up that way to produce military arms. But even without those, China still has the single largest military industrial complex on the face of the entire earth, meaning they can churn out tanks, armored fighting vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, APCs. They can churn out artillery. They can churn out, and now they're churning out helicopters rapidly. For the past over 5 years, 6 years now, China has added all those additional factories that they started constructing at the end of the 90s, 98, 99 or so. And they all came online around the mid-2000 teens. When that occurred, guess what else happened around the same time? The Pentagon's own supercomputers projected us losing every single solitary war to who? To China. To China. To China. And even in the NATO war drills, the actual drills they do with all the NATO partners, they lost those to Russia. And that uncovered a whole bunch of weaknesses, especially in the military logistics, meaning the Western armies did not have the artillery shells nor the pieces that would be able to stand up to Russia's enormous artillery arm. Russia and China, for all intents and purposes, are tied in the number of artillery they have, and both nations even have additional artillery pieces in long-term storage that they could bring out, refurbish, and equip brand new artillery divisions and brigades with. Yep, they can. Because each of those countries has an excess of over 10,000 pieces. I think China's between it's like 10 and 12, and then Russia's is like 17 to 20,000. So if they brought out all of those stocks that they produced during the Cold War, gave them a once-over, and paired those pieces with modern artillery spotting methods like drones, like modern FDC, fire direction control systems and personnel, those pieces are every bit as effective as they've always been on the modern battlefield. Then that's not even counting the new stuff that they can churn out. So China has the biggest tank fleet in the world, even more than Russia. China has 19,300 main battle tanks, and they have 3,800 light tanks. A lot of those are in storage for reserve and paramilitary forces, but they're maintained. They're kept in installations like armories for these units, and they can be brought out and put immediately into service when they mobilize reserves or paramilitary forces. They have the biggest armored fighting vehicle fleet in the world, with their infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, and armored fighting vehicles like your armored trucks and MRAPs and such. They have the biggest air defense artillery arm in the world. They have, along with Russia, they have the biggest field artillery arm in the world, and they have the world's biggest, most advanced Navy, and they have the world's biggest, most advanced combat air fleet out of their Air Force, meaning they have the most combat aircraft of any nation on the face of the earth. And it's all very modern and effective. In fact, most of their planes outperform our planes. And that's a fact. So to deal with China, the world hegemon, who has the ability, the true world superpower, who produces the most steel, the most aluminum, the most tungsten, the most titanium, the most zinc, and the most gunpowder, really, and chemicals in general for making other types of munitions, because China has the world's biggest chemical industry within their ginormous manufacturing sector in terms of output and number of factories now. Nobody can compete with that. Nobody. You need aluminum to make aircraft. You need steel to make ground vehicles and ships. You need titanium, too. You also need tungsten so you can have extremely potent sabot rounds for tanks or anti-materiel bullets, or on the flip side, for armor protection, because you can put a certain amount of tungsten, maybe 2% in rolled homogeneous steel armor, and make that armor the strongest possible alloy for tank armor or applique armor kits or whatever else. So China is ahead in all these areas, ahead of everyone in the world. China is the true world superpower. They lead in many key areas of technology. This nation can produce miniature artificial stars. They've demonstrated this. They've showed it. They're making reactors to harness free energy from it. They also have particle colliders. They've mastered AI and robotics. They're the number one in AI and robotics, and that's a fact. You know, a nation like that, I mean, they have hypersonics, and they're the only nation that's taken hypersonics a step further and made fractional orbital bombardment, where they actually launch a rocket around the world, and then on the terminal phase of the attack, they can release a bunch of glide vehicles, hypersonic glide vehicles, that can all fly in and hit their target before the target even knew what even hit them. China has developed and fine-tuned it. They've tested it multiple times. No other nation has achieved that. So, you know, if they've harnessed plasma energy and they've got particle colliders, then you already know that they have anti-gravity craft comparable to the, what is that? That Tr3B, or yeah, that's right. That's what it was. The Tr3B or a Tr3A. That it's obvious that China has the same technology, maybe even better than what we have. They've jumped a long way by leaps and bounds. They have the most wide-reaching intelligence gathering arms of any nation on the face of the earth. They conduct all sorts of academic espionage. They conduct all sorts of technical espionage through the internet. They can hack and steal things that way. Academic espionage by, you know, taking intellectual property and stealing it for themselves. And that's how, over the past 30 years, they've built their own indigenous capabilities, means their own homegrown capabilities, off of that taken knowledge. And now they've surpassed the West in virtually every area that even matters. Why can't people see that? Why can't they see how dangerous the CCP is? They're the most dangerous threat that we face in the West. It's not these punk-ass, sniveling Western uber-rich elites that think they're running shit. They don't run nothing. They're weak. They don't have the ability to enforce their will, so they depend heavily on psyops to convince people they're stronger than what they really are when they're really not. All you need to prove that is simple mathematics, simple look at the capabilities. They do not have the capability to enforce their will throughout even their whole own power block, the whole Western power block. They can't do that. They just don't have the numbers. They don't have the capabilities. And they've lost a lot of their capabilities they did possess by sending it all off to be destroyed in a proxy war. Yes, they're losing vital stocks of ammunition. They're losing vital systems that they would need to wage war themselves. And they were already substantially smaller than even Russia. And Russia's not even as big as China. China has the biggest combat air fleet, biggest navy. They have the biggest ground forces by a humongous margin. I mean, Russia is only the second biggest after China. And they've lost a whole bunch of vital logistics, supplies, systems, you name it, to this proxy conflict going on in Eastern Europe. I have to be careful what I say. I want this video to make it to people. So they, in losing all of that to the number 2 power in the world, when the number 1 power that's unrivaled, the Red Dragon, the Great Red Dragon, hasn't even done anything yet. And when they do, everyone's going to feel it. Even here in our own country, because they are here in our own country. They're living among us in disguises. You know, they might be student visa holders, they might be business people, you know, that might be their disguise, but they're really Trojan shock troops for the day that we get invaded. Now, I'm not saying that that's everybody, you know, of course, you know, there's a lot of good people, you know, that are legit, you know, here for good reasons, you know, because they want to do well for their families. I'm talking about people that take advantage of that and use it as a disguise for themselves. You know, whole units, whole battalions, whole divisions, whole brigades, whole regiments. They're here. They're here. And they're on CCP regime-owned properties. China is the biggest landowner in America, hands down. They own more land than BlackRock, Vanguard, Gates, all of them. China is the biggest landowner in the United States. They own whole ports. Our biggest West Coast port, even Long Beach. They also own LA port. They own Seattle, Houston, Miami, amid other ports or parts of ports, like terminals. They have been able to import all their logistics, troops. A lot of them are even disguised as these border jumpers that constantly are coming across our wide open southern and northern borders. Some come in through planes or through ship, and they disguise themselves as students or whatever else, and until they go to their CCP properties where they do a deployment, they sit on the properties like I show in my audio book with the Chinese character Private Li Chung of the PLA. I showed exactly how that type of thing works. So I don't get where the disconnect is, where people aren't understanding that the CCP, it's even biblically compliant, because the Bible, there is no West mentioned after Babylon is destroyed by China and their allies like Russia and all their smaller allies that come along for the ride. But predominantly, China obviously provides the lion's share of the forces because they have the biggest forces all the way around. So basically, when they take over and colonize this place and strip mine it and turn it into new China, and maybe up north into new Russia, the Arctic territories with all their resources. When North America gets divvied up between China and Russia, and China gets the lower 48 and lower part of Canada, this is going to be a Chi-Com colony. They're going to strip mine it. They're going to enslave the people or genocide the rest. That's why I call Wei Feng the Heinrich Himmler of the East, because he's just like Heinrich Himmler. He has genocidal ambitions for what he wants to do to the American people, according to his own words and his own speeches. And their actions are speaking louder than words, because their actions show that they have been getting ready for a massive world war while we've been sitting around with our proverbial thumbs up our asses doing nothing. In fact, we've weakened ourselves substantially to where it would be a cakewalk for China to come stomping in here and take whatever they want. And nobody would be able to stop them, especially when they use hybrid warfare, or also called fourth generation warfare, which means you blend the Trojan horse concept. There's your CCP properties, your civil military fusion policy, as it applies to those forces hiding on the CCP properties throughout this country. Then you add the Trojan horse concept, to the concept of blitzkrieg. That would be your external forces that race in from Canada, Mexico, and beachland and parachute in if they're paratroopers to act as a heavy-handed reinforcements to the Trojans already inside doing all the heavy lifting. Do you understand what that means? That means there's no such thing as a front line, and nobody will be safe anywhere, because you're going to have enemies already inside our land wreaking havoc, taking things over immensely fast. So fast, people won't even know what hit them. You'll have entire installations, key grid areas, infrastructure, roads, cities, entire cities, starting from bigger down to smaller. You'll have them being captured basically within a matter of days. Short days is all it would take. And I've showed it step by step in all of my work, from the map battles to the character perspective, the street level view, as I call it, from the main characters in my stories, my audiobook and in my typed out stories. They're all along the same timeline, same invasion, same scenario. It's all there to convey what a best case scenario for us would look like. And the best case is even still horrible. We basically lose our entire country. Almost. We have barely any survivors, and the whole place gets strip mined by the time their colonization ends and they decide to pull out. And they don't even pull out because they weren't losing. They pulled out to appease their own people, who just got tired of the prolonged war and seeing relatives coming home in coffins, like any other counterinsurgency conflict that lasts for a long time. They were very close, even in my best case for us, for America, they were even close to literally eliminating the entire population down to the last man. Had the conflict been allowed to run for 2 more years, they would have basically wiped everybody out, and they would have no need to leave then. They could continue exploiting everything. But, they decided to break even. They'd already made tons of money, trillions, and they harvested all kinds of food, and they decided, you know what, we'll just pull out and go to Canada where we have a puppet regime in power that's compliant and can still provide a lot of our food needs. And this way we can appease our people, pull out to make them happy, and still be food independent because we still own the rump state of Canada, whatever's left of it, So that's how the best case scenario ended. And this country was decimated. It was desolate, destroyed, decimated. And that's a best case. In a worst case scenario, they never leave. They just continually stay and develop this place into a full-fledged replica of Red China. It'll be New China. It'll all be to serve the will of their comrade Emperor Xi and the will of the party, the CCP regime. So people don't understand that. When we get taken over by China, and we will, because our population's very war naive. They don't know anything about small unit tactics. They don't know anything about survival and nomadic conditions. This is going to force everybody out of their homes. Nobody will be where they began at when this thing begins, when it kicks off. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm saying nobody will be staying in their homes throughout this entire thing. You're going to be forced out of your home very quickly, or you're going to stay and get shelled or have munitions dropped on you or fired on you or whatever else. People are going to lose their communities, their homes, everything, because they're going to be ran out of it. And if they choose to stay and fight, they're just going to get slaughtered. Because let me tell you something. When they strike, they're going to take down all our satellites. There goes your satellite data transfers, communications, for like satellite phones and such. There goes your GPS. There goes everything that you depend on from satellites. They have the ability to do that. China has mastered anti-satellite weapons, and even Russia has, for that matter. But China has a lot more than even Russia has. They have a lot more of these weapons because they've had them first. They successfully tested these in the early 2000s, and it was a big deal. It was in newspapers back then. I remember it. So these anti-satellite weapons, within a matter of maybe an hour, hour and a half, they can shoot down every last satellite. They'd start with our military satellites and then work their way down to commercial satellites. And by the time an hour or an hour and a half has elapsed after reloading all their systems several times, they will have knocked down all the satellites. Then, while that's going on, you have a tandem cyber strike, which takes out our grid, telecom, TV, everything. You're not going to have any running water, electricity, television, or any type of internet or telecom, because all of that will be basically, how the effects of ransomware works. The systems are shut down and cannot be brought back until you paid the ransom. Well, this is going to work like that, but on a different level. This is going to be to where only they can disable it by inputting a code into the system they used to carry out the cyber attack. So all of our grid and everything else is going to be shut down. No power, no water, no plumbing, no telecom, internet, none of that. No TV. It'll all be gone. So there goes your ability to use communications, to be able to organize, to be able to coordinate. There goes everything. So people are not going to be effective whatsoever at all when they can't communicate, they can't organize. Because let me tell you, there's going to be a lot of reactionary idiots that think they can take on the whole PLA or the whole PAP or, the whole Russian army, the whole whatever. They're going to run out there like idiots, and they're going to get blown away because the enemy, 8 out of 10 times is going to see them first and deal with them immediately on sight. Because they have recon assets that can find you first, and they can direct artillery fire onto you, an airstrike, like a precision airstrike. Or they might not even do that. They might even just fly a heavy strategic bomber over your town and just carpet munition your town into total oblivion, or city, or whatever. They can do all kinds of things. They might be able to drone strike you and not even have to use an aircraft or a helicopter, gunship, or a artillery pieces, rocket or howitzer. They might even just do that. They might just do a simple drone strike. There's all kinds of options they have. Or they might send a cruise missile flying into your area from a ship, or from a standoff cruise missile that was fired from a heavy strategic bomber. There's all kinds of things they can use. The options are really limitless. So people don't understand that. You can only do so much as one person, and you can only do so much with what you have. Your rifle, okay, man to man, you have a chance, but they're not going to be alone. They're going to be in teams, and they're going to be wearing body armor. Your rifle is not going to do anything whatsoever at all to their armor personnel carrier, or much less to their infantry fighting vehicle, which is even more heavily armored and capable and upgunned. Their infantry fighting vehicles carry way more potent weapons than what our Bradley infantry fighting vehicle carries. Even as good as the Bradley's 20 millimeter gun is, and that thing can tear some shit up. Even as good as the Bradley's 20 millimeter is, and even as good as the 2 tow missiles it can carry are, let me tell you, the Chi-Com vehicles have even stronger armor protection. They can have added applique or ERA kits put on them to make them even stronger, make them even more impervious to different types of anti-tank weapons or whatever. And they also carry much bigger weapons. They carry a 100 millimeter main gun. They carry a 30 millimeter autocannon, which is way bigger than a 20 millimeter. That thing will shred a Bradley to absolute total trash. It's and our armor personnel carriers, they call them the rolling Zippos, because back in the Vietnam War, when they'd get lit up, sometimes the alloyed armor would actually catch fire, if they were struck by an RPG or just shot up in such a way with certain types of incendiary rounds to where it literally would set the armor ablaze. You can go read about that. There's all kinds of testimonies about that. From different countries too, that imported these weapons and, used them in combat, because we sold a lot of those that we produced in the early Cold War. We sold those to other countries. They're definitely not the best armor personnel carrier. They're okay. It's better than having nothing, but, from side hits, because it's aluminum armor, AK steel cord rounds can penetrate through the side. 7.62 by 39 millimeter. If it's a steel cord round, it'll penetrate right through the side armor of those armor personnel carriers that we have, those M113s. That's why when the Stryker came along, it was so much better for us. But it's the older stuff we have in bigger quantities is absolute garbage. The Chinese stuff is way, way better. They use their very powerful steel tungsten alloys to, armor up their vehicles, especially their tanks and IFVs now. So, there's even a ZBD-08 infantry fighting vehicle that allegedly has a 35 millimeter autocannon on it. That's insane. That is insane in terms of power. But the 100 millimeter main gun is damaging enough. That thing will send a, damn near a tank shell flying into, whatever it fires upon. Plus, they carry 2 missiles themselves, and the Chinese make excellent anti-tank missiles. They have the Heilianjiang series. They have the 08, they have the 10, and they have the 12. And they probably have more than that, but those are just the main ones that I've come across in my research. Now, the HJ-10 is very long range, very powerful, and that's what the thumbnail of this video is. It's called an AFT-10. It's a Chinese anti-tank vehicle that would equip like an anti-tank battalion that might be attached to an armored division, or I'm sorry, an armored battalion, might be part of a company that's attached to an armored battalion. I meant to say not battalion, but a company, part of an armored battalion. You would have an anti-tank company within that same armored battalion that has tanks and, perhaps some infantry grenadier types that are there to protect the armor, to clear the way ahead for their armor to pass through, especially in urban combat scenarios, like I've illustrated throughout my story, especially in the parts that take place in the cities, especially like in the Cap City battle. I showed how that works many times. That's often a tactic employed in urban fighting. So now you have all that. That's just one example. The difference between the armored vehicles, not only do they have way more, but their vehicles are way better. They have more capabilities. They even have IR and laser scrambling devices and everything else. That's to throw off the accuracy of certain types of anti-tank missiles. The Chinese are very well advanced. Their tanks have those capabilities too. They're newer too, especially the Type 96B and the Type 99A. Those are the two deadliest tanks on the modern battlefield, besides the Russian T-14 Armata and T-90 and the German Leopard 2A7. The A7 is the most upgraded Leopard 2, and the Leopard 2 has a very, very sturdy reputation. It's already been used in combat in a few instances. Believe in the Balkans and also in Afghan, because the Dutch, I think it was, brought their tanks along when they were deployed as part of NATO, and they got to use them in combat in Afghan, and they've been tested, and they're pretty sturdy vehicles, just like their reputation that preceded them. So I'll add that in there. The Germans do make some good stuff. The only problem with the Germans is they don't spend the money to maintain their military. You have to pay for upkeep. You have to do maintenance. You got to spend money on your forces. It doesn't matter how good your stuff is. It'll break from wear and tear after a while, and you'll have to replace parts and everything else. There's a whole logistical system involved with militaries. Things don't just get up and run automatically. No, you have to maintain it or you lose it. The Germans have some really quiet, really effective diesel-electric subs, but they only have like 6 of them. So that's the problem. The Germans scaled back massively at the end of the Cold War. That like when the Cold War ended, the Germans, after they reunited East and West Germany, they started selling off all that hardware from both countries merging, including older, West German stuff and older East German stuff, and they only kept a small amount of what was left, for themselves, while selling off the rest. They got rid of most of their Air Force, their combat aircraft. They got rid of most of their tanks. They got rid of, a whole bunch of things, ships. I mean, you name it. They got rid of it. They sold it. So that's the problem with the Germans. Their military is now a joke. While at the very end of the Cold War, even though it was a conscript army, I mean, I'm sure they still would have performed well, and on paper, because we had a conscript army in Vietnam. I mean, they did what they could. They tried, they fought, So I'm sure the German military, even on paper with all they had, would have been a formidable force had they not downsized so horribly after the Cold War ended. Same with all the other European militaries. They're all a joke too. They did the same as Germany. They downscaled, and they really are struggling to be able to send any more equipment. I mean that. They're having to go to other countries to beg for weapons. They have to go to North Africa and the Middle East to beg for weapons to send to that proxy conflict, because the West is running out. They're running low. Now they're trying to send aircraft. Man, they're about to lose a whole bunch of different types of systems. The Russians are destroying everything. The West doesn't stand a chance. All the West can do, and they wouldn't even be able to do it well, is try to throw up some kind of defense, but it wouldn't work by virtue of the sheer amounts of attrition they face in terms of the ammo the Russians possess, and especially the Chinese. But if we're just talking about Russia has 1 billion shells of all different calibers for artillery and tank shells. It would literally take them, even though they're steady producing more, it would take them like 40 years. Maybe it was like 37, 38 wait, but it was close to about 40 years at the rate of 20,000 to 50,000 shells a day. It would swing between 37 and 38 something years before they actually exhausted all their stocks. You know how long it takes Britain and France to exhaust their stocks? In the NATO drills, it only took them 8 days, and their entire national stockpile of artillery shells was gone. You cannot fight a war without artillery. I've talked about all this before, so I'm not going to go into it again, but you just simply can't do it. You can't, when you have an enemy that outnumbers you like multiple times fold in artillery numbers, and the Russians even have more tanks. They have more tanks than NATO combined, and China has even more tanks than Russia and more armored vehicles like IFVs, APCs, AFVs, like the armored trucks and MRAPs too. China has well over 60,000. It's like 63,000 something. We only have 20,000, so they have over 3 times more armored fighting vehicles, wheeled and tracked, than we do. That's your IFVs, APCs, armored trucks, MRAPs, things like that. It's not even a competition against China. China's on a whole nother level from everybody else. But Russia is the second biggest in basically everything. They only tie China in number of artillery, but they have the second biggest armored fighting vehicle fleet. They have the second biggest tank fleet, and they have a lot of other tanks in their boneyards that I'm sure they could bring back. But it would need a lot of work. They'd have to refurbish them. They've been sitting out there rusting for many years. Some of them were retired recently and put in the boneyards and could still be brought back out and worked on and brought back up to fighting condition. But a lot of their tanks in the boneyards are the older T-54/55 series, and T-62s and 64s that are all sitting out there collecting rust. But they do have some 72s in there, which I'm sure they've pulled some of those out and refurbed them to replace whatever small amount of tanks they lost in the battlefield. Russia has thousands of tanks, and China is like twice what Russia is if you include their light tanks in with their enormous main battle tank fleet. I've gone over Chi-Com tanks before. I've shown you each individual tank by number, by type. I've read off a lot of the technical stats and everything else. I did the same thing with Russian tanks, but I had a lot of interruptions during that video, so I had to type some things out that I wasn't able to say or forgot to say. But yeah, I went over the tanks, and tanks are a very important part of warfare too. But all that aside, artillery, you just can't fight a war without it. You cannot fight without artillery, and NATO is woefully lacking in field artillery and in ammunition. You can't fight a war without ammo, too, or without fuel. And guess what? We're being starved of fuel, and that's due to as much of self-sabotage as it is to foreign sabotage. In a war, we have a lot of gas-guzzling vehicles. In a war, we're not going to be able, our army ain't going to be able to go nowhere, and they ain't going to be able to do a damn thing, especially when we have Trojans that begin inside our country on CCP properties that bust out and go straight for the jugular when they go for their objectives, which are all within, several miles. They're all within at least a dozen-mile radius at the very most. When they go for that, they go for the jugular because it's all so close. It'll only take a matter of days to completely subdue this country, and it'll all be thanks to the Trojans, the high technology China has, and Russia for that matter. They just don't have the numbers of things that China has. But between China and Russia, there's no hope of any type of anything. We're going to be totally obliterated. So my work is to warn people to get their ass in gear, learn about reality, because all these scenarios, these hypotheticals, are real life scenarios. I base a lot of it off of personal experience for when I was in Iraq. Because I show tons of examples of small unit fighting throughout those audio books, typed out stories, everything. By small unit fighting, I mean down to the nitty-gritty level, like where squads, platoons are doing things, company level. That's small nitty-gritty stuff that's like up close and personal type shit. I show all of that. People better pay attention to it because that's the exact reality that's coming here when we get taken over by the evil, wicked, diabolical, despotic, just undeniably evil secular humanist CCP regime. The worst atrocities occur under secular humanism. Do you know why? Because secular humanism is secular, meaning it's atheistic. It doesn't believe in a god. So they substitute that for man or the political party that's in power in a secular humanist regime. Like in China's case, it's the CCP. That means there's no limits on the evil that they can do to other people because they don't believe in a god that keeps them in line, that keeps their morals in check. They don't have to have morals when they don't believe in God. That's why the worst atrocities always happen under secular humanist regimes. Not even theocratic regimes are as evil as secular humanist regimes. You look at what happens in some of those Muslim countries, and yeah, it's bad, but it's nowhere near on the level of secular humanism, where people get tossed into concentration camps, Lao guys, gulags, or whatever, and they get tortured and worked to death and abused in all kinds of horrific ways. I mean, that is what secular humanism does to humanity. It shits all over it. So yes, while there's like evil theocratic regimes and, parts of the world, like especially in the Middle you've got, in East Asia, you've got secular humanism just totally running rampant against their own people, but they'll be doing it against foreign peoples even more, because listen, China has their entire nation under surveillance from all the cameras everywhere. Its AI systems are literally able to monitor everyone to make the job of their security services just that much easier. So we're talking about a country that mastered AI and robotics. To me, there's nothing more horrifying, as I've said before, than a CCP loyal AI paired with a robot. Can you even imagine that? A robot that would be loyal to the CCP and do whatever it took to basically press forward the goals of that regime. Can you even imagine that? How cold and evil such a robot would be, paired with AI that thinks it's a member to the CCP and has pledged extreme loyalty to the party and to Xi Jinping? Because whatever goes in is what comes out, because AI is programmed. So if you program an AI to be undyingly loyal to a certain man or group, then that AI is going to become just that. What you input, you get output. So if you have CCP programmers making these AI systems, they're going to be loyal to the end for the CCP regime, and they're going to do whatever it takes, especially when they get robotic bodies. When you pair these AIs with robotic bodies, and China's the leader, the world leader in robotics, can you fathom that? Just take a moment to think about the ramifications of that. China has no doubt anti-gravity craft, like the Tr3Bs or Tr3As. I mean, they have stuff like that too. Russia probably even does by now. I mean, China is this behemoth, this superpower that people are in denial about because nobody wants to believe that this despotic, evil regime has surpassed us and left us miles behind. They've left us miles behind, and there's nothing we can do about it. There's no recourse for the country or its people, which is why I do the work I do to help you navigate what is coming. You can't stop what's coming. You can just learn how to wade through it. And I'm trying to help people understand that. I just don't know where the disconnect is. People don't understand what the purpose of this work is to show you real life examples of how these things go so that you can learn what works, what doesn't work, and why and how. And I show very clear, solid examples of that through the different characters. I mean, flat out, some of them just get wiped out on the spot unceremoniously. There's no, lead up to it. They just get whacked. You know why? Because that's real life. Sometimes you be walking or talking and you get smacked down by some sniper or something. I mean, like that's real shit. You have to acknowledge that. You have to understand there's real dangers throughout the battlefield. A lot of these people that think they're gung-ho, they're reactionary, they don't understand the first thing about tactics or warfare, but they think somehow they're going to be able to fight. These people need this education the most so they can learn how to be effective people instead of just idiots that go out and get cut down by enemy fire, because when we get invaded, it'll be merciless. You're not going to be able to say, "Oh, time out, I ran out of ammunition. Time out, let me run away and go get some more ammo." Or time out, I ran out of logistics like food and supplies. Oh no, I got to go to the store. Guess what? There won't be no stores. The only store you'll have is the stuff you put away in cache sites, wherever you buried some items. That'll be it. Because if you're a nomad, you're going to need cache sites. Because while hunting and fishing can augment your food supply, and it's great to do, you're not always going to be successful at hunting, and you're not always going to be successful at fishing, which is why you need to bury supplies in cache sites. I have that featured all throughout all of my work, cache sites and how important they are. How important nomadism and semi-nomadism is, and why it's so damn important. Because you're not going to be in your house. You're going to be forced out of your home, and you're going to be basically on the run. You're going to be trying to stay ahead of the different sweeps, security sweeps and cordons and searches that the enemy troops are going to do to round people up. You're going to need to know these things. Why do you think I show all this stuff in my work? Because this is real shit. These are real countermeasures. And if you don't practice them, then you're going to be going down like everybody else. It's just that easy. It's that simple. The audiobook, now that it's done, it's just jam-packed with all kinds of good stuff in it. I mean, legit, good stuff. You can learn from the experiences of all the different characters, the good and bad experiences. You can learn from it all. Again, you can learn what works, what doesn't, and why. I mean, hell, I even put improvisation in the story. But you gotta be smart if you have to improvise. Like, you've got to adjust it to, current circumstances. Like in my first finale part, which covers the end of what happened to the characters in the Cap City battle, they went and found some gray hair dye in a smashed up pharmacy, and they used it to disguise themselves as old men, because the Chi-Coms were only looking at the time for military age males to round up. So think about that. That was highly adaptive, highly creative. That's an example of, adapting and overcoming a situation and being smart about it. Yeah, they messed up by carrying their IDs too long, but they thought that would be helpful once they met up with other Americans out in the woods or wherever they were going, to show them their credentials like it mattered. The country was defunct. It doesn't matter who you were before the country fell. You know what I mean? And the country's been taken over. You don't need any ID at that point. You might as well just get rid of it because it's a liability for you. You see, I let them have a true blessing from God, because yes, God does interact in some of these experiences, and he put Private Lee Chung, who finally encountered Sergeant Richardson. They finally had their encounter, but there was a twist to it. God put the right man, right place, right time, right mood, right frame of mind, right everything in the path of Sergeant Richardson, which allowed him, that I classify that as a miracle, not just a blessing, but that's a small miracle in his path, who gave him a pass. Do you know, in World War II, as the war was ending, things like that were going on? Not just with the Soviets and Germans interactions, but also, with the West interactions. There were actual Soviet troops that allowed, German women to actually, get out of an area before the other Soviet troops came, the rear echelon troops that were doing all the plundering and raping, pillaging, all that. There were instances like that. So I made an instance sort of like that in my story. I use historical examples, current examples. I blend it all together with research, very in-depth research, and my own personal experience as a combat soldier. I was field artillery, but I got used like infantry, so I got to see two different sides of warfare. I got to send rounds down range and put steel on the target with a 155 millimeter howitzer, but I also got to do some nitty gritty up close and personal work. I got to go out there and get in skirmishes or do raids and things like that, on villages and things, of that nature. I'm not going to go into all of that, but I used a lot of that as my base level experience to write these stories, because actually writing these stories was actually therapeutic for me in a way. I got to really put a lot of aspects of myself in some of these different characters too. Even the PLA character, the main character, I modeled him a lot off of myself. I modeled him a whole lot off of myself. Just the introspective thinking, the guilt, all the things that he felt, and just the way he felt in general about things. I modeled him off of me myself, So, I also put other aspects of me into some of the other characters, but that's, it was a way for me to get out, what I thought, personal thoughts out onto paper, to where it made this masterpiece of a work of literature, and it was educational. These works are all educational, from the map battle documentaries like 96 Hour Invasion and the new documentary Pacific Northwest. You've got the civil conflict one, which was great. That'll come before we even get invaded. Multi-faction civil conflict, according to what's written in Jeremiah. Multiple leaders will, violence or chaos, or I'm sorry, conflict or violence will erupt, depending on the translation, will erupt between various leaders, which means it's a multi-factional Syrian-style civil conflict. America's a big land, so naturally you're going to have different factions all duking it out with each other. It's a big country. So I made a very realistic hypothetical civil conflict documentary based on, it's not just biblically compliant, but it's also based on real things that are all coalescing right now. I called a lot of it before it even happened. And here it is. A lot of aspects of that docuseries are coming to pass today, really in recent days, but it's all adding up to the same outcome. So, there's that, there's all my invasion work, now the completed audio book. All of this stuff is educational, and I suggest strongly that people use it. Very strongly, very avidly. Because it's to help you get a knowledge base about all this type of stuff. It's to help you understand what's going on around you once it all kicks off and we get invaded, or even before that in an internal situation. It's to show you all the different aspects of this stuff so that you, as a person, can be, more prepared mentally for all of it and not be caught with your pants down, caught off guard, or even, potentially being a reactionary idiot who runs out and thinks they're going to take on, entire groupings of troops. It doesn't work like that. It never works like that. The Iraqis at first tried to do that against us, but they can't go toe-to-toe with us. We had armored vehicles. We had, crew serve weapons. We had, which are like your machine guns, your M250 cals, your, 240 Bravo, your, M249, and your Mark 19, which is a belt-fed grenade launcher. From more or less like a grenade machine gun, but we had those crew serve weapons. They couldn't go toe to toe with us. We had better tactics. Our troops are better organized. They might have injured some of our men, or maybe got one here or there, but they didn't. But they couldn't go toe to toe with us and actually make it. That's why they turned into hit and run forces. And I showed examples of the same concepts throughout my work. how at first people think that they're going to be like, Billy Badass and try to take on, these enemy forces that have armored vehicles, machine guns. They're organized. They're way better organized. There's more of them operating in concert with all kinds of different weapons. They have recon assets, even down to small quadcopter drones. They can radio in coordinates. It can, show the coordinates of where enemies are so that they can call in an artillery strike on you or a mortar strike or a rocket strike, whatever, and just wipe you out on the spot. On the spot. No way to get out of it. That's why I also showed the average timing it took for artillery missions to come in, because the partisans learned that in the story. They learned they had to hurry up and get the hell out of a place once they carried out some type of operation against the occupation troops, because the occupation troops were going to call in a strike on them. Whether it was an airstrike, drone strike, artillery strike, howitzer or rocket artillery, or mortar strike, or whatever else, or cruise missile, whatever. They had to get in, do what they had to do, and get out quick. If they stayed and tried to go toe-to-toe, they lost. They always lost. That's why I showed what works, what doesn't, and why. There's reasons behind it. I showed the mechanical details of how everything works. It's all research and analytically based information. It's also based on blending my personal experience in combat. It's also blended with historical and current references and more, even aspects of psychology and sociology, because I had different types of people in those stories. Because I had different people in it. I had to make them all unique in their own way so it would be real. It was so real that I'm listening to it from the beginning, and I've gotten to part 10. I've listened to parts 1 through 10 just tonight, and I'm like, wow, I might have it's hard to read to people, so I might have made tiny mistakes here or there, but it wasn't really that noticeable, and it all turned out really well. And I know that after about part 10, the videos get longer and even more detailed, so I know that this is a badass audio book, and I really, really suggest people listen to it from beginning to end to get the best possible insights of what this situation looks like, why it looks like that, and how it all works mechanically, down to the last details, even down to the nitty-gritty, group-on-group battles where you have like a squad of foreign troops versus a couple American partisans. I mean, I went into immense levels of detail with this. So, I highly suggest people use it. This is why I do what I do on my channel, to convey to everybody the very steep, stark realities of all that's coming here and how it's going to literally affect everything in the literal sense, to show how things are really going to go down and why, so that you can possibly navigate it and get out of it alive. I'd be lying if I said everybody's going to make it, but at least you'll have a chance if you have a knowledge base built up and you understand what's actually going on around you and why. And these stories can help you with that. They can help you see why these things work the way they do so that you can be a step ahead of it and actually make decent plans for yourself, survival, emergency plans. You know where you live. You know where you should put things. I can't tell you all that, but you know your areas that you live in. You know where you should be putting cache sites. You know all that because you're going to become a nomad. You're going to get forced out of your home because if you don't, you'll just get flattened along with it. And everything you ever stocked up on will be gone. Because if anybody keeps everything they have in a central location, then you're pretty much screwed if you lose that location. If it gets overrun or if it gets, flattened by some kind of munition or if it gets, lit up by heavy machine gun fire. I don't know. It could be whatever. But people better pay attention. They better pay attention. And they better really take this work serious that I've done here. Because this work can help you. It really can help you. Yes, River Song. Yes. Cowards are an abomination. Yes. I am the most pro self-defense person that anybody could ever meet. Because while I'm not for naked aggression, if somebody is coming with the intent to harm you, you have every right to defend yourself. And as hard and as strong as you need to go. You can be like Shammah in the book of 2 Samuel, where he, with an ox goad or a spear, again, depending on translation, defeated 600 Philistine aggressors attacking him. He defeated every last one of those 600 with his ox goad or spear. You know, that's a hell of a feat. And that was self-defense, and the strength of God was put into him to be able to defend himself against those odds and prevail. No denying that. So if God was ever for self-defense, he's always for self-defense. God never changes. So remember that. If you're defending yourself, you're doing a righteous act. You know, self-defense is not the same thing at all as naked aggression. Aggression is a sin, but defense is righteous. It is righteous and proper. It's a holy thing to do, because you know it's all throughout the Word. It's all throughout the Word. Even if it was only one time in the whole Word, if God sanctioned it at any time, then He's always for it, because He never changes. Never changes. You know, anyone that says God changes is a liar and a heretic. You know, I mean, straight up, because you know, the Word tells us that God never changes. Because if God changed, you know, he wouldn't be God. Because, you know, for him to be God, he has to be steady. He can't contradict himself. There's none of that. Because God could never do that. God could never do that. He could never contradict himself. So, again, if God was ever for self-defense, then he's always for self-defense. Always. Not naked aggression, but self-defense. They're two different things. So everybody should have defense tools with which to protect themselves. You know, I've got mine, you know. I mean, everybody should have self-defense implements and tools and protection, especially like armor or maybe a helmet for head protection, you know, because you're going to need that stuff. You're going to need that stuff in the coming world we're about to live in, where foreign troops occupy our land and the CCP makes the rules. And Xi Jinping, who seeks worship, because people in China have to worship him. You know, they put his pictures up even in churches and everything. They make their people worship Xi and the CCP party, the Chinese Communist Party. They seek worship. And even in other countries, they worship Xi, the countries that are under the thumb of the Red Chinese. You know, Xi's posters, I've showed them all around the world. You know, they will be in the United States. Xi Jinping, the CCP party flag, the red banners, and the Chinese national flag will fly over all our buildings. And on them, it'll drape our buildings too. CCP propaganda imagery, Xi Jinping posters, and oil paintings like the one I have in my, that massive oil painting of him in my community tab where I show all the different Xi propaganda imagery. That stuff is going to be in our country. When they defeat us and we're vanquished, we're a defeated nation, that stuff is all going to be hastily put up everywhere, because they're going to make you see your new ruler and master. You know, that's if you choose to bow down before it, but that would make you a coward. That's why I show what I show, to show people the reality that's coming and what people need to do to possibly get through it. You know, to give you at least a chance. Even though most of my characters ended up being killed, there were a very few handful that made it. You know, if you watch my finale parts, you know, it goes over all of that, because they're really one part, but I had to break it up into two because it would have been just an insanely long video to have, all three of the finales for the Cap battle, for the Montana characters, going through their struggle in Montana, and the in the Michigan area, where in Ann Arbor, you know, where those characters were going through their struggle. This was a nationwide thing, so I picked 3 different areas to illustrate all the different goings on, you know, from different angles and perspectives, you know, from an urban or suburban / rural and a completely rural perspective. So I showed all these things. So everybody should really, really pay very close attention. I mean, like, immerse yourself in it. Close your eyes, listen to the story, and imagine it as you're listening to my words. I want you to immerse yourselves in it and be like you're there and experiencing it. Because I want you to feel it. I want you to know that this is the reality that's coming. It's not only biblically compliant, but it's also reality compliant. Because when you do the level of research I do into all this stuff and you see it all manifesting, the physical and the spiritual worlds are corroborating together, which means this is absolutely 100%, without a doubt, exactly what the future will be. We will be under CCP regime rule. There will be CHICOM and whoever other troops are here, assisting them, but it'll be mostly their troops because they really don't need any help. They have the most forces under arms of any nation on earth. 29 million, almost 30 million. You know how many we have? We have like 2 million. We did have 2.2. I think they got rid of like 200,000 more for not doing certain things. They said they were going to get rid of 500,000 for not taking the MOTB. So, it gives you a sort of understanding of how small and how incapable we really truly are. I mean, our armed forces is even spread around the world in a whole bunch of places they don't even need to be in that aren't militarily viable and worth holding. While at home, we're left with even smaller forces that in no way, shape, or form would be able to stand up to the Trojans, the externals, and the high technology that's going to be used against them by the Chinese and also by the Russians and their other allies. Just to boot, to put the cherry on the cake. China's ginormous, though. I've gone over all these reasons throughout all my work, throughout all my live shows, my miscellaneous playlist of shows, and my Friday show playlist. I go over all this stuff. I talk about why China, using real facts, figures, stats, capabilities, and numbers, just industry stuff. China's a behemoth. Nobody can compete with them. They're on a whole nother level, conventionally, industrially, technologically, and monetarily with their enormous gold holdings, biggest gold holder on earth. They could never be broke. Their economy is even growing, by leaps and bounds now. I pay very close attention to them. Russia's economy's also grown. The sanctions did nothing to them. And China's already getting rid of dollar assets, dollar-related assets, dollar-denominated assets. They're getting rid of all of that stuff, treasuries and more. They're positioning themselves to completely part ways with us because they don't need us. Do you know the domestic market of China is like 5 times what our market is? They don't need to sell junk to us. They can sell stuff to their own people. Really, they don't need us. They do not need us. It's like how when we used to be industrialized, we didn't need really the rest of the world at one point. We had a big enough domestic market for our own stuff. That's how it is for China now. They do not need us whatsoever at all. They've gotten the crown jewels 30 years ago, and they've built their own indigenous capabilities from all that stuff they've taken from us. And now they've surpassed us in many key vital areas of technology that have a dual civilian and military usage. So they're all about dual use technologies in China, things that can be used in the general economic sector to enhance their society, and they also want technology that's going to give them the cutting edge in terms of military affairs. They're enormous. Nobody can compete with them. I've gone over all the reasons toward the beginning of this video. There's even more reasons than that. China has the biggest real economy in the world. We have this fake funny money Ponzi scheme, fraud, and, usury and debt-based economy. We have a paper economy, like literally. We barely have any industry left, while China's sitting over there with 40% of the world's industry. They're not worried about us. They have the biggest navy in the world. They have the biggest combat air fleet on Earth, which means they have the biggest ability to wage an offensive air campaign. They have the biggest ground forces, bar none, hands down. Nobody comes even close to their size. If they fully mobilized all their paramilitary branches, which China has their national militia, which is like their, paramilitary national guard. It's enormous. There's millions in that. There's also their marine militia, which also is comprised of, several million. Then you have your National Construction Corps, which is about like 1.5 to 2 million, which they're like a paramilitary combat / civil engineer. They're armed. They're armed and combat trained too. And you have also the PLA Strategic Reserve, which is only goes under their military command in a time of war, but it's basically oriented for just home defense only. Like to keep order in the country when they're doing their overseas campaign, like taking over America. And then you have, their PAP, their People's Armed Police. They're like the vanguard. They're like basically like the Praetorian Guard, like the fanatics of the CCP. They're like what your Waffen SS used to be in Germany back in its fascist days. But it's like a Chinese version of it. They got that, and they're big. There's like almost 4 million of them. Then you've got the regular Chi-Com army. They're military, I should say, all 4 branches of its strategic missile forces, PLA ground forces, PLAN, the Navy, and the PLAAF, the Air Force. They're 4 million strong, just their active duty military. It's enormous. Their reserves are 5 million for their active duty military. That's 9 million military, and there's 20 million paramilitary. A parallel military structure. That's what paramilitary is. It's a parallel military. So it's like they have 2 different militaries. That's how big China is. They've got 2 whole militaries. Gargantuan forces. So nobody in the world can compete with that. Nobody comes anywhere near that. You will never hear hardly anybody else. I mean, you might hear a few, but you hardly hear anybody else talking about all their true capabilities and numbers and sizes, like I do, because people they just don't want to believe that China has surpassed us. They're holding on to our past reputation like it's like basically the American reputation is that of a declined credit card. Like I've said before, you may have the credit card, but you don't have shit on it. You ain't got nothing on it. That's our true state of affairs. We're living off of our past reputation, but in reality, we've been surpassed. We've been surpassed badly and left behind just by virtue of the sheer numbers, capabilities, stats, and more of China versus us in categories that matter. We're far behind them. They have the most modernized nuke arsenal. Sure, it may only be the 3rd biggest nuke arsenal in the world, but it's still enough to get the job done. They could flatten our country 2 times with 1,000 nukes. And I told you the reason why they have 1,000. There's a lot of lowball estimates, but, in reality, they've had first. Hey, Miriam and River Song and Casey, I think I saw you in here. Rage Against the Machine. And Bryden. Hey, Bryden, what's up, man? Good to see you. Good to see you. You're always welcome here. In fact, I'll make you a mod. Just if you see any shills or people acting up, basically, we stomp shills here, trolls. Yeah, Bryden's my buddy. Yep, I made you a mod, Bryden. I'm glad to see you here. So if you see any trolls or people acting rude, just kick them out. River Song and Casey, how you been? I seen you in here. Called Gems. Yeah, you're right, Casey. We have a collapse. We have a collapse right before the internal conflict, the multi-faction internal conflict, and then we get invaded by China and all their buddies, like Russia and small allies. Beaver Valley Updates, great to see you. Welcome, welcome. And P4 Plenty, what's up, man? Who else is in here? I don't want to miss anybody. Well, I'm glad to see you all in here. Welcome, everybody. River Song, I'll make you a mod too, because you've been here a while, I think. I think I've seen you before a bunch of times. I'll make you a mod. You know what to do. Anybody being rude, just stomp them. Well, all right, everybody. You all have a blessed night, and thank you for coming. I appreciate each and every one of you all. Thank you. Y'all have a blessed night. So take care, everybody.